Did you guys know that English mathematician Ada Lovelace has been called the first computer programmer, for she had written an algorithm for a computing machine in the mid-1800s? Also, Katherine Johnson has been considered as a NASA computer because she had plotted the flight paths for an earlier space expedition. Hashtag women and technology. As I have just stated, the first people in computer science were women, and that is Ada Lovelace and Katherine Johnson. And that is also the whole intent for this series, Coding for Kids in Python, for I want to spread the word for all the girls out there to start learning coding at a very young age. Anyway, in my previous video in this series, we had some fun doing the fun activities of chapter 4. I think you guys should definitely check that video out and also follow along in doing those activities because you will have a blast. Anyway, in today's video, we will all be learning about all kinds of loops. Yes, and I mean that there's not just one type of loop in the programming world. To be more specific, we have the for loop, while loop, and infinite loop. And in today's video, I'll be covering the entire chapter 5 of the book Coding for Kids Python, written by Mrs. Adrienne Tacke. So you guys should definitely stay tuned on NPStation to learn more about loops.
Of things we know.
Hello everyone and welcome back to NPStation. So like I said, in today's video we are going to be learning about for loops and while loops. So a big part of why computers are so powerful is that they can repeat many actions or calculations very quickly. So one of the ways we can tell a computer to do this is through loops. A loop is a special kind of programming statement that allows you to repeat a block of code. So like all programming languages, Python has two kinds of main loops, which are the for loops and the while loops. How about first I go ahead to go to Google Colab, open that. Alright, now what we're actually going to do is we're going to click on this button over here, which is New Notebook. We're going to have a fresh, clean notebook open for us. Alright, so we already have a code block ready for us to type some code in. Alright, so the first kind of loop is called a for loop. This kind of loop repeats a specific number of times. So we usually use for loops with lists and when we know how many times we need to repeat a block of code. So let's say we create a list of numbers. Let's also say that we want to add, how about 2 to each number in this list and then print the new numbers out. How do we do that? With a for loop. Alright, first let's go ahead and declare our numbers list. So we do this because loops always need a group of items to go through. This process of going through a group of items is also called iterating through a loop. Iteration means going through a group of things one by one. So let's also fill the numbers list with some, well, you guessed it, numbers. So let's go ahead and type in numbers, which is going to be our list name. Open the square brackets and type in, how about numbers 1 through 5? Alright, now let's close our square brackets. Awesome. So now let's begin coding a for loop by using the for keyword. So this keyword signals to the computer that we want to do a for loop. So let's click enter and just type in our keyword for. Great! So now the computer knows you want to do a loop, but it's like, hey human, it's cool you want me to do a loop and all, but what do you want me to loop through? We're getting there, machine. So next, let's tell the computer which group of items to go through and how many times to do it. In our case, we want to go through every number in our numbers list. So we write the loop to do that. So we already have our for keyword. We're going to type in number. Oh, let me spell that right. Number in numbers. That's it. Oh, and we also add our colon at the end. So the code we just wrote is the same as telling the computer for every number in the numbers list, do something. Let me repeat that. So it's saying for every number in the numbers list, so for every number, which is 1 through 5, in the numbers list, which is the list name, you have to do something. Pretty straightforward, right? So now the computer knows which group of items to iterate through. Finally, let's tell the computer to iterate through each number in our list, add 2 to it, because that's a cool thing to do, and print that new number to the console. Remember, the block of code that comes after a colon means it belongs to the related line of code above it and should always be indented. So actually it already indents the next line of code if we click enter. So how about now we go ahead and write our print function, and in our parentheses we're going to write our number and add our addition sign and plus 2, because we're saying we want to add 2 to each number in the numbers list. And let's close those set of parentheses. And that's it. Let's go ahead and run this code, and we should see the results of our for loop in the output. Let's click that run button, wait for it to load, and voila, we got our output, which is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So here's what it did. We asked the computer to add 2 to each number in the numbers list. So that's exactly what it did. It added 2 to 1, which is 3, and then 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. So as we've learned, for loops iterate a specific amount of times. The computer knows how many times to iterate based on the iterator we gave it. So in our earlier example, we iterated through every item in the list we passed to our for loop. So that would be the for number. Here, let me go highlight that. So it would be the for number in numbers. So this works great if you want to go through every item in a list or a tuple. But what if we don't want to go through every item? What if we only want to iterate, say, 3 times, or only go through a specific range of numbers? We can do all of these things, guys. So every for loop requires an iterator and a group of items. So when you look at the code for a for loop, you can think of it like this. So for is of course our keyword, and we have our iterator, right? We have our iterator, and we have our in, and we have the group of our items. And I put the colon. So the iterator and the group of items are the parts you replace when you create your own for loop. So if you wanted to simply iterate 3 times rather than iterate through an entire list or tuple with items in it, we would replace the iterator and the group of items with the following. Go ahead and click enter. Actually, we're going to delete this line of code. There we go. Alright, so now let's type in for I in range and open parentheses, and we're going to put a 3 because we want the range we want to iterate 3 times, right? And close the parentheses. So our iterator is now a new variable, which is I. And that is actually the standard name for an iterator variable in programming. And our group of items is now a range of numbers, which is provided to us by the built-in range function. So this function can take up to 3 parameters. And don't worry, because we'll see how to use each of them shortly. So in this code is basically telling the computer, for every iteration in the range of numbers 0 to 3, do something. So if we add a print function to see how the iterator variable changes, we'll see exactly how this range works. So we're going to go ahead and add our colon at the end, click enter, and it already indents for us. So here we're going to write our print function, open the parentheses, and write our I variable. So this would result, let me go ahead. Yeah. We're going to click the run button, and this would result in this output, which is 0, 1, 2. So this example shows the range function taking a single parameter, which is a stopping point. However, it can also take another parameter that is a starting point. This allows us to do something similar to slicing in lists and tuples by iterating over a specific range of numbers. So if we wanted to skip straight to the number 10 and then iterate through the numbers 10 to 20, we'd use the range function like this. So we would using two parameters. So we're going to write our code for I in range, and we're going to actually open a set of parentheses, and in here we're going to write 10 and 21. Close the parentheses and add a colon. So this, now we're going to click enter, write print, and open parentheses, and again the variable I, and this would result in this output. So 10, the numbers 10 all the way to 20. Okay, there's another cool thing we can do with the range function. So when we give the range function all three parameters, the third one is used as a step, or the number of items to skip when iterating. So if we only wanted to print the multiples of 10 in the numbers between, let's say, 0 and 100, we'd use the range function. And I'm going to show you how to do it like right now. All right, so for I in range, so we're typing like the same code every time because we're using the range function, and we're going to open our set of parentheses, and let's put 0, 101, 101, and 10, comma 10, close parentheses and add a colon. And now we're going to click enter, put in our print function, and again our variable I, and close the set of parentheses. And of course this would result into this output. So it counted to 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100. So that was pretty neat and very useful. Alright, the second type of loop is a while loop. This kind of loop also repeats a block of code over and over, but it will keep repeating as long as a Boolean expression continues to be true to the computer. We also use this type of loop with groups of items, just like in for loops. However, the while loop is very different than a for loop because we tend to use the while loop when we don't know the exact number of times we want to repeat a block of code. So let's say our numbers list from the previous section suddenly contained a lot more numbers. So let's go ahead and type in numbers, which is our list name, and we're going to type numbers 1 through 20. This is a lot of typing, so let's start off. Alright, so now we close our square brackets like so. So we now declared our numbers list. So now, instead of adding 2 to every number in the list and printing all of them out to our Google Colab, how about we decide to go through the list and only print specific ones? To be exact, we only want to print the numbers that, how about, with an addition of 2, they become a new number that is less than 20. You guys may be thinking, how in the world do we do this? Should we use a for loop? Probably not. We don't know beforehand and exactly how many times we'll be repeating the code that adds 2. So for this kind of problem, we'll use a while loop. So we've already declared our numbers list. So let's also declare, let me click enter. All right, let's also declare our iterator which is the variable that's used to keep track of the number of loops we run. So in programming, we sometimes call this a counter variable because it counts the number of iterations we go through, and it's usually named I. So let's go ahead and type I equals 0. So this variable is very important. Can you guys guess why? Well, keep in mind the differences between for loops and while loops. Have a guess, any of you, or no clue? It's okay, either way. Here's why it's important. So, if you remember what makes for loops different from while loops, it's that we tell a for loop exactly how many times to repeat a block of code. And with while loops, it's that we tell a for loop so with while loops, it's that we tell a for loop exactly how many times to repeat itself, right? So with while loops, we need to give them a little help. That's why we created this iterator variable. So when used with our Boolean expression, it acts as a signal to the while loop to keep going because we haven't stated exactly how many times to repeat its code. Does that make sense? Okay. How about we start our while loop? Go ahead and click enter again and just type in our keyword. In this case, it's while. Great job. Now let's give our while loop a Boolean expression to check against. This rule helps the computer decide if it should continue repeating the code or if it should stop. In this scenario, we still want it to iterate through all of the numbers in our list. And since we are keeping track of the number of loops we do, we have to use a little bit more logic to tell the computer if we have gone through each object in our numbers list. How would we do this? So let's go ahead and type or open our parentheses and let's write our variable I less than len, and open another set of parentheses and write our list name, which is numbers, and close both sets of parentheses and add a colon. That's how we know that our numbers list has a certain number of objects in it. If we iterate through our list the same number of times as the total amount of objects in it, then we know we have gone through them all. This means our Boolean expression is asking, is our iterator variable less than the total amount of objects in our numbers list? If it is, that means we have more numbers to iterate through. And that also means we repeat our loop. So since our iterator is no longer less than the total amount of objects, it means we have iterated through them all and we can finally stop repeating our loop. And did you guys notice that I actually used a new piece of code in our Boolean expression, which was len? This is a function which is a reusable block of code that returns a value. This simply means that we receive some sort of output back from the function we use. So usually the values we receive back are like an integer, but they can also be a string, Boolean, list, or any other data type that we might find useful. So the len function isn't just any plain function though. It's one of Python's many built-in functions. The len function, which is short for length, takes the input you give it, in this case our numbers list, and it counts the total of items in it, right? And it gives that total back to you. That's exactly what we needed for a Boolean expression. So we'll actually learn more about the other built-in functions as well as how to create our own in the next few videos where I review the next few chapters in the book. So where are we? Oh yeah. So now that we have our Boolean expression in place, we can begin writing the code to repeat in our loop. So this would be the perfect spot to check and see if the new number we create after adding 2 will be less than 20. Let's go ahead and click enter, and of course since we added a colon in our previous line, it will already indent the next one. Add our if statement and open a set of parentheses. Let's put in our list name, which is numbers, and add our square brackets, and here we're going to put in our variable I. Now let's put add 2, close the parentheses, less than symbol, and 20. That was a lot of code. we're again going to put another colon at the end of this line of code. So keep in mind that we only want to print the number if the Boolean expression in our if statement is true. That's why we write that code before our actual print statement. So lastly, we indent our if statement since it should only run after it passes the Boolean expression in our while loop. And next, remember how we access specific items in a list? You got it, with indices. This time, we'll use them to iterate through each object in our list, and because we have an iterator variable, we can use it to access the next object in the list every time we repeat the loop. Here's what's happening. So, since we know that we will be iterating through all objects in the numbers list, and since we started our iterator variable at 0, the first time we enter the loop, our Boolean expression in our if statement will be like this. So, it would be if, open the parentheses, numbers, which is again our list name, and then we're going to put in square brackets this time a 0, and of course we're going to add 2, close the set of parentheses, oh, there we go, and then we're going to add our less than symbol and 20 and our colon. So that's exactly what we want as the first time we enter the loop. You want to deal with the first object in the numbers list. And don't forget, lists start at 0. So you guys should definitely know about indices if you have checked out my previous videos in the Coding for Kids in Python video series, because I had gone through the whole index topic in that video. So please do make sure to check it out. Alright, when we are done with the repeated code, so we actually increment or add one count to our iterator variable. So this means our iterator variable is now set to 0. Is now set to 1. So the next loop that repeats means our Boolean expression will now look like this. So we're going to go ahead and put 1 instead. Instead of the 0 in our square brackets. Does that make sense? So because our iterator variable was incremented the last time we ran the loop, and because we are also using the iterator as our index, we are able to get the next item in the numbers list. And just like before, we increment our iterator variable when we are done with our repeated code. So like when we repeat the loop the next time, the index we are using also changes. Pretty cool, right? So as we iterate through our loop, we ask the computer the same question. Hey, if you add 2 to the next number in the numbers list, would the result be less than 20? If it is, we finally get to the print function and print that number. Again, we indent this code as it is a new block that only runs after passing the first levels of the Boolean expression. So let's go and delete this line of code since I wanted to show you so you guys got a thorough understanding. Alright, so now what we're going to do is click enter again and write our print function, or print statement. And we're inside the parentheses, let's put numbers, open the set of square brackets, put in our variable I, and add 2. And again, close the parentheses. Finally, and probably the most important part of while loops, we have to add code to increment our iterator variable. Remember, we are the ones keeping track of how many loops we have repeated. We also know how important the iterator variable is because we use it in our while loops Boolean expression and as our index in our if statement's Boolean expression. So we're going to go ahead and remember, do not put a colon at the end of this line. We're going to go ahead to press enter. And here we're going to write our variable I plus equals 1. Notice how I put this code on the same indentation level as the if statement? Well, because there's no other code that needs to be repeated, and because we always want to keep count of how many times we have repeated our loop, we place the increment code, which is I plus equals 1, here right before it starts the loop all over again. Now, I said this was the most important part of while loops. You're probably wondering, well, why? Well, how about we try running this while loop without the code to increment our iterator variable? Let's see what happens. Let's delete this. Or first, I'm going to copy the line and now delete it. And now what I'm going to do is let's click run. Oh no. Guys, we've just encountered our first infinite loop. Your shell or Google Colab will just keep on printing the same number over and over and over forever. See, look at this. There's a little scroll here, and look how far. It will just keep on printing the same number over and over again. And don't worry, to stop it, all we have to do is press the Control C key. Phew, that was wild and very close. So an infinite loop is a loop that will repeat itself over and over again so basically forever. So of course you guys can probably tell what the meaning of infinite loop is because the word is right in the loop. Infinite means to go on forever, and that's exactly what this code does. So remember, our while loop depends on its Boolean expression to know when to stop. In our example, part of our Boolean expression uses the iterator variable. So if we never increment our iterator variable, our Boolean expression will always evaluate to the same thing, usually false. And if it always evaluates as false, then it will never stop the loop. So be careful, guys, and try not to create any infinite loops in your code. But don't worry, at least you know what to do when it happens. So that's it. Now let's how about we stop the code, restart. Oh, let's click cancel. We're gonna X that out. And now what we're gonna do is actually type in our code that I had copied. So just go ahead and paste it. But remember, we need to put it in the same indentation level as our if statement. Let's go ahead and run this code. And processing. There we go. So we got our output, which is numbers 3 all the way to 19. So let me go through this code. So guys, as you know, we have asked the computer to add 2 to every number in the numbers list, but only print the numbers that when you add 2 to it, it equals less than 20. And that's exactly what it did. So since you can't, so it actually didn't add 2 to 19 and 20. Why? Well, because if you add 2 to 19, it's going to be 21, right? And that is greater than 20. If you add 2 to 20, it's going to be 22, and that, of course, is also greater than 20. So that's why the last number it added to and printed that number was 18. So guys, in this chapter we learned about for loops and while loops. So we see how useful they are for repeating blocks of code, and we know when to use one over the other. So how about we go over what we learned in today's video or in this chapter. So for loops are usually used when exactly we know how many times we need to repeat a block of code. And while loops are usually used when we don't know how many times to repeat a certain block of code. So basically, for loops and while loops are the opposite. And we also need to be very careful not to write any infinite loops, but there's always the Control and C to stop it. So you can even create more complex loops by putting if statements within them. Alright, so this sadly is the end of today's video, but don't worry because in my next video we are going to be doing the fun activities of chapter 5, and trust me, they are super duper fun. And in our next chapter, we are going to take a look at this. We're actually going to leave Google Colab for a few videos, or maybe just one, and we are going to explore about this cool module that Python has, and it's called Turtle. I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with this, but if you're not, then don't worry because you will be finding out in the few next videos of mine. So in Turtle, we're going to draw shapes, change colors, and move shapes around on the screen. So I just can't wait to do Turtle with you guys. It's going to be super duper fun. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and please do stay tuned on MP Station for more book reviews and coding videos. Bye everyone, and stay safe, read more books, and keep on coding. Bye everyone.